So according to a survey from NerdWallet, 74% of Americans like to use a monthly budget, but somehow 84% of those same people admit they're still overspending. Now, those numbers don't make a lot of sense at first, but after looking a bit deeper at some of the flaws with traditional budgeting methods, I think it's honestly fair to say that budgeting could possibly be killing your bank account instead of helping it if it's being done the wrong way. So in this video, I want to go over the 5 reasons why most people get budgeting completely wrong, some of the common issues they run into, and then also some of the secrets and tools that have helped me personally to fix these issues myself to the point where I'm now saving roughly 80% of my income. Starting with the first reason here, which is very psychological, and that is you might be approaching your budget with a restrictive mindset. And also thank you to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video, but more about them later. So maybe you tell yourself that you can only spend $100 on dining or $50 on entertainment this month, but the problem with this is that by setting these restrictions here, some people might just start feeling a bit trapped or kind of like they're missing out on the fun parts of life, and then that can sort of lead them to rebel against their own budget by overspending. Instead, the goal with budgeting should be to use it as more of a reactive tool that tells us how much money we have coming in and then how much money we have going out every month. That way we can sort of just look at every dollar we earn and then move it around with a purpose and with a plan. To do that though, we've got to get rid of that restrictive mindset and then make the act of budgeting or tracking our spending something we actually want to do. And so one of the best solutions that I have found to do this is by making budgeting an enjoyable habit by focusing on something called the 4 laws of behavior change. Now, this comes from one of my favorite books that's super popular called Atomic Habits. And in this book, the author James Clear talks about these 4 laws for changing people's behaviors to form new habits by first making a certain behavior change obvious, followed by the second law, which is to make it attractive, third, make it easy, and fourth, make it satisfying. So maybe we can make budgeting more obvious and attractive by just setting aside 20 minutes every other week to go ahead and sit down at our favorite coffee shops. That way we can review our spending in a positive environment. And then maybe we can also make it easy and satisfying by using a super simple app or a budgeting template or something like that that can give us a nice visual on how things are going that doesn't also overcomplicate things. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and share a couple of tools that I personally use later on that have really helped me out a lot with this stuff. But the bottom line here is just to do whatever you can to make yourself enjoy the process of tracking your own spending, and also try not to focus too much on cutting back on things right as you're starting out. So just get a better understanding of where your money's going every month, because again, the real point here is just to get away from that whole restrictive mindset first. And even if you do find yourself still overspending a little bit in the short term, that's going to be okay to me, because again, we're building a good lasting habit for the long term, and it's really that which is going to make it a whole lot easier to identify and eventually fix the true causes behind why we're overspending. Now, one of those causes for spending too much that I want to talk about for the second reason behind why people get budgeting completely wrong is that too many of us are not being proactive with saving on the top 2 expenses, which are going to be housing and transportation. The fact is that for most people, housing and transportation is going to make up roughly half of our spending every month on average. And so if we could focus the majority of our effort into finding ways to cut back in a non-restrictive way on those top 2 categories alone, that is going to have a huge impact on our budget. To me, the best way to cut back on these things is going to be by understanding what we can actually afford in housing and transportation before we ever make these big spending decisions in the first place, like buying a home, signing an apartment lease, or purchasing a car. And luckily, there are a few easy rules here that I've always tried to follow that have helped me to do that. So with housing, there's the 30% rule. And what that says here is that if you want to buy a house, for example, then what you can do is take the cost of your monthly mortgage payment plus any estimated monthly utilities, property taxes, maintenance, insurance, HOA fees, and other stuff like that. And then you want to divide that by your monthly gross pay, where the goal here is to get a number that's roughly around 30% or less. Now, depending on your income and where you live, it might be a little bit tough to stay below that 30% mark because housing has become very expensive, so you can always just bump that number up a little bit if you have to. But the point here is to sort of use this as a general guideline instead of a hard rule, because too many people honestly are just overspending on their monthly housing solely because they did not even take the time to think about what they could truly afford in the first place. Now, if you're renting like I'm right now, then you really only have to worry about your rent payment plus utilities and maybe renter's insurance when calculating this rule. So again, just think about your income and think about what kind of housing costs you can actually afford in your budget to get somewhere around 30% or so of your gross pay. And if you're currently way above 30%, then also maybe see if you can move to a new place, bring in some roommates, or at least make some other sort of big adjustment to your housing costs, because with housing being one of the largest expenses here, you do not want to be overspending. Now, as a renter myself, another thing that I like to do is use a no annual fee credit card called the Built MasterCard to make my rent payment, because that allows me to earn reward points on my rent without paying any extra transaction fees. And then what I do is I take those points and use them to help lower my travel and transportation costs by redeeming for things like flights. So always good to mention that here when I am talking about rent, but you can go ahead and learn more about that card in a separate video that I made that I'll link to down below. Now, another big way to save on transportation is going to be by purchasing a car that you can actually afford as well. And one easy thing to follow for this is going to be called the 20-4-10 rule. What this rule says is that if you have to finance a car purchase, purchase, then you should aim to put down at least 20% for a down payment towards the purchase price. You should also choose a repayment term for the auto loan that's going to be 4 years or less, and then your total monthly transportation cost, including that car payment, plus any estimated insurance, gas, or maintenance cost, that should be at least 10% or less than your gross monthly pay. Too many people just break this rule by putting very little money down, extending the loan term out to as much as 7 years or more, or not even factoring in other hidden costs like vehicle maintenance. So again, you're going to be able to save the most money and really help out your budget a lot by just knowing your numbers and thinking a little bit about these basic budgeting rules before you ever make a big purchase or sign a lease. Now, after addressing housing and transportation, there's still going to be a ton of other ways to go ahead and save in all the other places of your budget as well. But before we get to that, I did want to talk about Rocket Money next here because this app has become a major budgeting tool for me. Rocket Money is the app you need to save more and manage your money better, whether that's creating a custom budget, tracking your spending, or even just canceling any unwanted subscriptions you have that you didn't even realize you were still paying for. Canceling recurring subscriptions is honestly one of the easiest ways to go ahead and create more room in your budget every single month for the stuff you actually do want to spend your money on. And the cool thing with Rocket Money is that you can literally identify and then cancel subscriptions right within their app with just a couple of taps. So if you hate wasting time on the phone with customer service, then you don't have to worry about that here. But to me, the ability to use Rocket Money as one of my main budgeting tools has been super helpful because I just have all my credit cards and all my accounts linked within their app. And then anytime I go out and spend, I can see all my transactions in one single place across my 20 plus cards, all categorized. That way I can compare my expenses to my income to make sure that I'm saving money the way I want to. So take control of your finances today and go to rocketmoney.com/Daniel Braun to get started for free. That's rocketmoney.com/Daniel Braun to get started for free, or go ahead and check out the link down below in the description. And thank you again to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. All right, now the third reason why most people fail with their budgeting is because of the tough reality that in today's world, your budget might just have unrealistic expectations, and that can mean a few different things. First of all, when some people get started with budgeting, they might just make certain assumptions about how much they're spending on their top variable costs, like maybe shopping, dining, groceries, and stuff like that. But once they actually go ahead and sit down and start tracking their spending habits, a lot of the times what they'll notice is they've been significantly underestimating how much they spend on those things. Now, sometimes people are underestimating because they might not be used to budgeting, but other times the fact is they might just be setting these really unrealistic expectations about their budget because maybe they haven't fully wrapped their head around just how much the prices of everything have risen in such a short period of time over the past few years. I know that for myself, when I started budgeting for my food spending as just a single guy living alone in Philadelphia back in 2019, I could probably expect to consistently spend around $400 on food every month, but now that I'm married and obviously prices have just risen a ton over the past 5 years at grocery stores and restaurants, I'd say that right now I'm paying at least double that or even more, even though in my mind I think I should still only be budgeting for the same old $400 on that stuff. Inflation has definitely played a big role in just ruining a ton of budgets out there, but you cannot let that discourage you and really make you feel like you're doing something wrong, but you also cannot just play the victim and then blame other people because that's also not going to make prices go back down. It all starts with going back to the habit of enjoying budgeting itself to just better understand where you stand, because you might not like what you find, but you do have to go ahead and understand that and then interpret what you find so that way you can put an action plan into place and then maybe cut back from other places in your budget if you have to. Another book that I really love is I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi, who also runs another really great YouTube channel as well now. But in that book, one of my favorite lines that I think about all the time is Ramit's advice to just spend extravagantly on the things you love and then cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't. And that kind of goes along with what he teaches about having what he calls a conscious spending plan. Too many people don't really take the time to think about whether or not the things they're spending on are really things they truly love. And so what you want to do is try to assign a job to each dollar you earn by identifying what you love and what you need to live a comfortable life. So that way you can just prioritize spending on those things first. And then after that, you can go ahead and cut back on everything else. Now, while you're doing that, you also want to have another mindset shift away from something that I think is another hidden factor here that is ruining people's budgets. And that is just simply comparing yourself to others. So in today's world of social media, we're constantly able to see what everyone else is up to, which can be a really cool thing at times. But for many of us, when we see friends or influencers and other people we know always out there traveling, going out to dinner, attending sports games, and buying cool stuff, it's kind of easy to feel like we have to keep up with that. As humans, we're just naturally going to start comparing ourselves to others, and then we might want to go out and start spending money on things so that way we can showcase to others that we're able to maintain some sort of invisible, made-up social media status. And for anyone that's trying to get their budget under control, this constant feeling of trying to impress others is something we can easily fall victim to, even if we don't realize it. So sometimes it's just good to mention this stuff and remind people that obviously you should not be comparing yourself to others, especially when it comes to spending money. And honestly, a lot of what you see on social media is going to be fake anyway. Plus, there's a lot of people out there who are still going into bad debt to fund all their travel and spending habits, or there might even be other people who have help from their parents or something like that. The point is, you never really know what someone else's financial situation is like, and it's easy to admire what appears to be wealth on the surface, but usually what you see on the surface is not at all the full picture, so do not make any assumptions, do not compare yourself to others, and do not fall victim to lifestyle inflation just to impress your Instagram followers, because that's obviously a huge trap and a guaranteed way to hurt your budget. Now, if you're still finding yourself overspending or even having a hard time fitting into some of those general budgeting rules that I talked about earlier for housing and transportation, then the reality here is you could be facing an income problem, and that is going to be the fifth reason for bad budgeting, which is not focusing enough time on income. The fact is, you can only reduce your spending by so much until you eventually hit a limit, and again, inflation has caused the overall cost of living to go up for almost everyone over the past few years as well, but your ability to increase your income in theory is going to have no limit. Now, obviously, it's not going to be an easy thing to do to increase your income, so don't get me wrong here, but I think the mistake is really going to be that we all want to look for some sort of a hack that's going to allow us to save more money by reducing our expenses lower and lower. So a lot of people just focus so much time and attention on squeezing out every last bit of savings they can. However, once you reach a certain point here of reducing your spending, I think your time is going to be much better spent on finding ways to increase your income. This is going to look a little bit different for everyone, but it might involve maybe focusing your time on some short-term income increasing activities like side hustles or job hopping, or it could maybe be a bit of a long-term time investment where maybe you're getting an advanced degree or you're working towards some sort of a promotion and climbing the corporate ladder that'll eventually pay more and lead to more room in your budget. When I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I save roughly 80% of my income right now, that is not something that happened easily or overnight, but instead it was really something that kind of naturally happened over time because I played a lot of financial defense at first by reducing my expenses so that I was saving at least something in my budget every single month. But then after I decreased my expenses up to a certain point, I kind of just focused all my time and attention over the past 4 years on offense as well by growing a business and then increasing my income through that, while also luckily enjoying every second of doing what I do for a living. So I am definitely fortunate for that as well. Now, you don't have to start a business, but find what works best for you and make sure you go out there and start playing some offense as well if you can, because there's not really any way of getting around that. So the whole line about how defense wins championships is something that's true, and it's kind of the way that I look at tracking my spending and controlling it with my budget. But you also obviously cannot win a championship without scoring on offense as well, and that's kind of what I'm hoping my guy Saquon Barkley does here with the Eagles this season. So I figured I'd connect that with the metaphor there. Now, like I said earlier, the tools you're going to use to budget are also very important here. So again, go ahead and check out Rocket Money at the link I'll have down below in the description to help out with your budgeting goals. And if you want another tool that I like to use along with Rocket Money, then you can go ahead and check out this video over here on the screen next, where I sort of just break down my entire budgeting process step by step with a free template you can download as well. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.